Most Americans believe Chinese students succeed because they're pushed harder, that they memorize more, study longer, and sacrifice creativity for discipline. That belief is comforting because it suggests the system works, just in a different, less humane way. But what if that's not the real advantage? What if Chinese students aren't outperforming the world despite their system, but because their system is preparing them for something the West isn't? Last year, I watched how top Chinese universities actually functioned, not through rankings or speeches, but by observing students before sunrise and long after midnight. What I saw wasn't pressure, it was preparation, a system quietly training patience, endurance, and strategic thinking at scale. And once you see it, an uncomfortable question emerges. What happens when a generation trained for long-term competition meets a world obsessed with short-term wins? That question is why this matters, and it's why so many people are misreading what's really happening. In the autumn of 2018, I spent 3 weeks embedded in the life of students at Tsinghua University in Beijing. Not as a lecturer or official visitor, but as a quiet observer moving through dormitories, libraries, and study halls. I wanted to understand not what the system claimed to do, but what it actually produced. I arrived expecting to find exhausted teenagers being crushed under impossible workloads, their creativity stamped out by rigid conformity. I had read the Western articles. I knew the narrative. Chinese education was authoritarian, mechanical, soul-destroying. It produced test-taking machines, not thinkers. But within 48 hours, that framework began to crack. What I witnessed wasn't robotic compliance. It was something far more unsettling, something that forced me to reconsider everything I thought I understood about how societies prepare their young for the future. On my second morning, I arrived at the main library at 5:45 in the morning, half an hour before official opening. I expected silence. Instead, there was already a line, not a small one. Dozens of students, mostly second and third years, waiting in the cold November air for the doors to unlock. They weren't there because of an exam the next day. Most had no immediate deadlines. They were there because this was normal. By 6:30, every seat in the reading rooms was occupied. These students would remain there, with brief breaks for meals, until the library closed at 11 at night. 17-hour days. Not during finals week. Every week. I sat near a young woman studying electrical engineering. Her desk was covered with textbooks, but also notebooks filled with her own diagrams, her own reformulations of complex theories. She wasn't memorizing. She was reconstructing knowledge from the ground up, testing herself to see if she truly understood. When I asked her why she worked so hard, she looked at me with genuine confusion, as if the question made no sense. She said, "If I don't understand it deeply now, I will fail later when it matters." There was no drama in her voice, no martyrdom. It was simply a statement of fact, a recognition that the future would test her in ways that surface knowledge could not survive. This is the first thing the West misunderstands. We imagine Chinese students work hard because they are forced to, because their parents are tiger mothers wielding shame and fear. But the students I met at Tsinghua were not driven by fear. They were driven by something more powerful and more durable. They were driven by the belief that the world does not owe them anything. That opportunity must be earned, and that the margin for error in their generation is vanishingly small. They understood something that many of their American peers do not: that the global economy is not a playground. It is a tournament, and in a tournament, preparation is everything. This belief is not abstract. It is rooted in lived family memory. The students I spoke with were almost all born in the late 1990s or early 2000s. Their parents grew up during China's economic transition, a period of violent disruption when entire industries collapsed overnight, when job security vanished, when the only people who survived were those who adapted faster than the chaos around them. These students grew up hearing stories of aunts and uncles who lost everything because they were not prepared, because they assumed stability would last. They learned early that the world is not stable, that comfort is temporary, and that the only real security comes from capability. This is why they study 17 hours a day, not because someone is forcing them, but because they have internalized a worldview in which failure to prepare is indistinguishable from choosing to fail. Now compare this to the psychological architecture of a typical American college student. I have taught at universities in the United States. I have watched bright, capable students approach their education as a transaction. They ask, "Will this be on the test?" They optimize for grades, not understanding. They are focused on the outcome, the credential, the piece of paper that will unlock the next door. This is not because American students are lazy or stupid. It is because they have been raised in a system that teaches them to manage short-term goals. Get into a good college, get a good GPA, get a good first job. Each step is a discrete hurdle, and once you clear it, you move on. There is little sense of cumulative preparation, little belief that what you learn in sophomore year will determine whether you survive a crisis 10 years later. The system is transactional, and so the students become transactional. They are not preparing for a tournament. They are collecting credentials for a resume. The Chinese system operates on a completely different temporal logic. It is not organized around semesters or courses. It is organized around the assumption that your entire 4 years of university are a single, continuous preparation for a life of competition that will never end. This is why Chinese students do not relax after exams. Exams are not the goal. Exams are diagnostic tests. The goal is to become someone who can solve problems no one has taught you to solve, in conditions no one warned you about. This difference in time horizon explains almost everything about why Chinese students outperform others. They are not smarter. They are not more talented. They are simply playing a longer game. Let me give you an example that crystallizes this. During my time at Tsinghua, I met a student named Wei. He was in his 3rd year studying computer science. He showed me his weekly schedule. It was color-coded and terrifyingly dense. Monday through Friday, he attended lectures from 8 in the morning until 5 in the afternoon. Then he went to the library until 11 at night, working on problem sets, coding projects, and independent research. On weekends, he worked on a startup project with 3 classmates. They were building a machine learning tool for analyzing medical images. It was unpaid. It might never generate revenue. But Wei said it didn't matter. He said, "In 5 years, everyone will need to understand how to build AI tools. If I wait until I have a job to learn this, it will be too late. My competitors will already know." He was 20 years old, and he was already thinking about competition 5 years in the future. Not hypothetical competition. He knew the names of students at Stanford, at MIT, at ETH Zurich, who were working on similar projects. He followed their progress. He knew what they were capable of, and he was determined not to be slower than them. This is not an isolated case. This is the norm. Chinese students today are hyper-aware that they are competing not just with their classmates, but with the top 1% of young people across the entire planet. They know that the jobs they want, the breakthroughs they hope to make, the companies they hope to build, will be contested by the most capable people from every country. And they know that in that contest, credentials matter far less than capability. This awareness produces a kind of voluntary intensity that no amount of parental pressure could replicate. They push themselves because they understand the stakes. Now here is where it gets interesting. The West looks at this intensity and sees a lack of balance, a lack of joy, a lack of the well-rounded liberal arts experience that American universities prize. We say, yes, they work hard, but they're not learning how to think critically. They're not exploring philosophy or literature or art. They're just grinding. This critique misses something crucial. The Chinese students I met were not intellectually narrow. Many of them read widely, argued passionately about politics and ethics, and had deep interests outside their majors. But they understood that exploration is a luxury you earn through competence. First, you master your craft. Then you have the freedom to explore. The Western model flips this. It says, explore first, find yourself, and competence will follow. For students from wealthy, stable backgrounds, this works. They have a safety net. They can afford to take risks, to major in anthropology, to spend a year finding themselves. But for students who understand that the world is a tournament, exploration without competence is suicide. You cannot afford to be interesting, but incapable. Interesting does not pay the rent. Interesting does not win the job. Interesting does not survive the next economic shock. This brings us to the second layer of the Chinese system's advantage, and this one is almost never discussed in the West. It is not just about individual students working harder. It is about the entire educational infrastructure being designed to simulate high-stakes competition from an early age. Let me explain what I mean. In the United States, we celebrate participation. We give trophies to every kid on the soccer team. We tell students that everyone is special, that everyone has unique talents, that success comes in many forms. This is psychologically kind. It protects self-esteem. But it also creates a generation that is shocked when they encounter real competition. They reach their 20s and suddenly discover that the world doesn't care about their feelings, that jobs go to the most capable, not the most deserving, and that losing is permanent. They are unprepared for the brutality of meritocratic selection because they were never exposed to it. The Chinese system does the opposite. It exposes children to high-stakes competition early and repeatedly. The Gaokao, the National University Entrance Exam, is not just a test. It is a filtering mechanism that determines the entire trajectory of your life. If you score in the top 1%, you go to Tsinghua or Peking University. If you score in the top 10%, you go to a good provincial university. If you score below that, your options narrow dramatically. There is no grade inflation. There is no subjective evaluation. There is no essay about your personal journey. There is only your score, and your score is ranked against millions of other students. This is brutal, it is unforgiving, but it is also clarifying. By the time a Chinese student reaches university, they have already experienced the most intense competitive pressure they will ever face. University, by comparison, feels manageable. They know how to handle stress. They know how to perform under pressure. They know that their effort directly determines their outcome. This psychological preparation is invisible to outsiders, but it is the foundation of their advantage. American students, by contrast, often experience their first real competitive pressure in their 20s, in job interviews or graduate school applications. And many of them crumble, not because they are weak, but because they were never trained for it. The Chinese students have been training for it since they were 15. By the time they compete in the global marketplace, they are veterans. Their American peers are still learning the rules. Now let me address the critique that always comes up at this point. The critique that says, yes, but this system destroys creativity. It produces conformists who can execute but cannot innovate. This is the most persistent and most comforting myth about Chinese education. It allows the West to believe that even though Chinese students work harder, they will never be truly great because they lack the spark, the rebellious spirit, the out-of-the-box thinking that only a liberal, free-thinking society can cultivate. I believed this myth myself for many years. But spending time inside the system forced me to confront an uncomfortable reality. The students I met at Tsinghua were not conformists. They were ferociously ambitious, intellectually curious, and willing to challenge authority in ways that surprised me. But their rebellion was not performative. It was practical. They did not waste time arguing about abstract principles. They focused on building things, on solving problems, on proving their ideas worked. This is a different kind of creativity. It is not the creativity of the artist in a cafe, sketching possibilities. It is the creativity of the engineer in a workshop, iterating until something functions. And in the 21st century global economy, the second kind of creativity is far more valuable than the first. Let me give you a concrete example. During my time at Tsinghua, I attended a student-run hackathon. It was a 48-hour event where teams competed to build the best prototype of a new technology product. I expected to see clones of American apps, slightly modified for the Chinese market. Instead, I saw teams building tools I had never imagined. One group created a system that used smartphone cameras to diagnose crop diseases for rural farmers who had no access to agricultural experts. Another team built a platform that allowed migrant workers to access legal advice through voice messages, bypassing the need for literacy. These were not abstract research projects. These were practical solutions to real problems, designed with a deep understanding of the constraints and needs of their users. The students had not been told to think outside the box. They had been told to solve a problem, and they had done so with extraordinary ingenuity. This is what the West misses when it dismisses Chinese students as uncreative. We define creativity as the freedom to imagine anything. They define creativity as the ability to make something work under constraints. And in the real world, constraints are everywhere. The ability to innovate within constraints is the most useful form of creativity there is. There is a third dimension to the Chinese system's advantage, and this one is the most culturally invisible to Western observers. It is about the social structure of learning itself. In American universities, learning is an individual pursuit. You go to class, you take notes, you study alone, you take the test alone. Collaboration exists, but it is optional, and in many cases it is discouraged as potential cheating. The Chinese system operates on a completely different model. Learning is social and collective by default. Students form study groups that function almost like startups. They divide labor, share insights, quiz each other relentlessly. If one person understands a concept, they are expected to teach it to others until everyone in the group understands it. This is not altruism. It is enlightened self-interest. Because in the Chinese system, your success is not just about your individual performance. It is about your ability to function in a team, to contribute to collective goals, to elevate those around you. This is preparation for the reality of modern work, where almost nothing of value is produced by individuals working alone. Everything important requires coordination, communication, and the ability to integrate your work with the work of others. American students, by contrast, are trained to see their peers as competitors. They hoard information. They optimize for individual achievement. And when they enter the workforce, they struggle to collaborate effectively because they have spent years being rewarded for solo performance. Chinese students arrive at their first jobs already fluent in the language of teamwork. They know how to subordinate their ego to the group. They know how to give and receive criticism without taking it personally. They know how to iterate quickly based on collective feedback. These are not skills you can learn from a textbook. They are habits formed through years of social learning, and they give Chinese graduates a massive advantage in any organization that values execution over individual genius. Now let me zoom out and connect this to the larger geopolitical question. Why does any of this matter beyond the individual success of Chinese students? It matters because education systems are not just about training individuals. They are about preparing entire generations for the challenges their societies will face. And the challenges of the 21st century are fundamentally different from those of the 20th. In the 20th century, the West succeeded because it had better technology, better institutions, and better capital. Individual talent mattered, but structural advantages mattered more. In the 21st century, those structural advantages are eroding. Technology spreads instantly. Capital flows globally. Institutions can be copied. What cannot be copied is the quality of your human capital, the depth of preparation of your young people, their ability to adapt, to endure, to outwork and outthink their competitors over decades, not quarters. This is where China has quietly built an asymmetric advantage. It is not producing better scientists or engineers on an individual basis, but it is producing millions of young people who are psychologically prepared for a world of permanent competition, who expect instability, who know how to function under pressure, and who are willing to sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term capability. The West, by contrast, is producing a generation that expects stability, that prioritizes well-being over achievement, that sees work-life balance as a right rather than a luxury, and that views competition as something vaguely unfair, something that should be mitigated by policy. This is not a moral judgment. It is a description of two different cultural operating systems. And in a world where the most important resources, technology, talent, and markets are being contested by multiple great powers, the society with the deeper preparation will have the advantage. Not immediately, not in a single quarter or a single year, but over time, as challenges accumulate and crises multiply, the society whose young people are trained for endurance will outlast the society whose young people are trained for comfort. Here is the part that makes people uncomfortable. The Chinese system is not better in every way. It is not more humane. It is not more joyful. It extracts a psychological cost that many individuals would not willingly pay. But it is more effective at producing a specific outcome, which is a large population of highly capable, highly motivated, highly disciplined young people who are ready to compete at the highest levels of the global economy. The West can critique this system. It can point out the costs.